Hey, Sun Devils, this is Mr. Moore. We're here, week 26 of the economics class. This is a required class for seniors. I'm here at Apple Valley High School, and I'm recording this lecture because we're doing distance learning. And if we were doing this in class, we would have the opportunity to discuss, ask questions, and dive into the concepts, and hopefully have some great academic conversations. I hope that as you listen to this lecture and as you take notes, that you'll bring those questions when we meet together, during the interactive portions of our class. But today, I need you to take notes and understand the fundamental economic concepts that make up our economy. What makes or breaks an economy? We are on a quest this semester to understand how economies work and to understand your part in it. And hopefully, we understand that economics is more than just business. It's not just about personal finances. It's not just about unemployment and inflation and GDP and all those indicators that we look at. It really is about choices and what we learn as a person. Each week during this economics class, when I lecture, I like to bring in a personal story of just some little things that I learned growing up. And one of the things that I learned when I graduated from high school, I worked in a cheese factory. And it wasn't the best job in the world, but what it was one of those jobs that motivated me to go to college because working on an assembly line, it wasn't bad right after high school. I mean, the money wasn't bad, but it was mind numbing. And I knew I was cut out for something more, to make more money, to be more successful than working on an assembly line. So if you work on an assembly line, I'm not cutting that down. I've been there, I've done that. But I didn't enjoy the experience. It was a great workout. We would get these 300-pound blocks of cheese, and then we'd have to slice them down into usable sizes and then cut them down from there into the size, the 1 pound or 2 pound blocks you'd buy at the store. I learned all kinds of things about the food processing business. We would take raw milk and add the enzymes and go through the process of pulling out the whey and get the cheese curds and pack it in. And then you let that chunk of cheese sit in a warm, dry room. Yes, warm, dry room. And over time, the bacteria would eat at the milk and it would form gas bubbles. That's why Swiss cheese has holes in it, because the bacteria forms gases, is releasing, is working these enzymes. And then you'd keep all of the Swiss cheese for at least 90 days to age it, and so the smell and that bitter taste that people like in cheeses, the older the cheese is, the better. And we would process this cheese. Sometimes when we'd go to package the cheese, there'd be mold growing on it. It turns out that mold on cheese is not bad for you. We just scrape it off. So if you have a block of cheese in your refrigerator and it grows mold on it, just scrape off the mold and you can eat the cheese. Now, that might sound gross to you, but sometimes we purposely grow mold on cheese. It's called blue cheese, right? It's a famous dressing. So there are some cheeses that purposely we grow mold on. But anyways, I learned all kinds of things like that. Here's a couple other little economic tips I learned. We were processing Swiss cheese one day, and we were filling an order, and we were slapping labels on the blocks of cheese after we had wrapped them and shrink wrapped them and sealed them up. And when we filled one order, the guy comes over and he says, "Hey, on these next blocks of Swiss cheese, you're going to put this no salt label on it, because the next order is for no salt Swiss cheese. People pay more money if it's low in sodium, if it's salt free." And I asked the guy, I'm like, "Well, how do I know? It's the same, like, we're running the same cheese. How do I know which one is no salt and which one has salt?" And he said, "None of the Swiss cheese has salt. It's all the same cheese, but this company, they slap the no salt label on there and they can charge more money for it." And I was like, "What?" So I thought that was really interesting. Sometimes we'll put labels. It wasn't false. They weren't lying, but the cheese, the regular cheese and the no salt cheese come from the same factory in the same batch. They're the exact same cheese, but one has a no salt label on it and they sell it for more at the store. The other thing is, we would slap different labels. So One company would pay us, like Land O'Lakes would pay us to put their label on the cheese. And then sometimes we just put the Gosner label on. That's where I work. And then sometimes we might do an order for like Albertsons and put the Albertsons label on it. Now, if you go to the grocery store, there's Land O'Lakes cheese, there's Gosner's cheese, and there's Albertsons cheese, like store brand, like Signature Select or whatever, the store brand is. Those could all come from the same factory, even though the price is different in the store. That's the economic lesson that I learned. Sometimes these food products, like a big company like Land O'Lakes, might subcontract to like a Gosner's food factory. So Land O'Lakes comes in and says, "Hey, we want you to produce cheese for us. We're going to put our label on it, even though it's made at your factory." And they do that on a lot of things. So it's something that I learned. If you pay more for a premium product, it might be premium. I'm not saying it's like this in everything, but it does get me to think about choices I make at the store. If I'm going to pay more for a product that might be made at the same store, and it might even be the actual same product, just different packaging, because these big corporations will subcontract with factories. Anyways, really fascinating stuff. Once you get out of high school, get into the job world, hopefully you'll have your own experiences as you learn these economic lessons of life. Each week, I'm going to try to maybe add to the repertoire of economic terminology. Today, we want to talk about economic indicators. That is, economists follow business cycles and include various earning reports. Here are some of the things that economists look at to see the health of an economy. They might look at unemployment rates, housing markets, consumer price index, like a measure for inflation, industrial production, the number of bankruptcies, the gross domestic product, the GDP of a country, internet traffic, and where people are hitting on the internet. How are retail sales going? How is the stock market? How are the prices on the stock market? Are they going up or down? What does corporate revenue look like? And how is the money supply and how is it changing? These are some of the things that are economic indicators that we might look at in an economy to see how healthy an economy is. Now, there is a poverty threshold, and this changes over time because of inflation. What we want to do is we want to know what is the lowest level of income set by the government that is needed to support a household. And what we do is if we find too many people or too many communities living below the poverty threshold, we start to see other significant problems happen. And there's really two factors to consider are the number of people in a household and where they live. Sometimes people use COLA, it's the cost of living adjustment. So I guess here's a way to put it into simple terminology. If I make 50,000 a year, and if I keep making 50,000 a year, each year that I keep making the same amount, I'm going to have less buying power because there's always the inevitable inflation happening. So if my income stays the same, say for 10 years, I'm making $50,000 per year. Over time, even though I'm making the same amount of money, the cost of things will continue to rise. Hopefully, not very much, but small increments. Price of gas goes up, the price of groceries goes up, and other things can factor into this, like a pandemic, right? Toilet paper shortage. There's all kinds of things that can factor into the cost of goods and services. But in general, over time, because of the principles of inflation, costs will go up. So if I let's say I get a 3% raise every year, even though I'm actually making more money, I'm just kind of barely keeping up with inflation. So and that's kind of a nice round number. It's not an exact number because inflation changes various years. That's what economists do. They study and they publish this stuff in the newspapers and online. So you can kind of see like what's the rate of inflation. But if your raise each year is not keeping up with the cost of living, COLA, then over time you might end up making more money but having less buying power. And those are some significant things that you'd want to pay attention to. Now, one of the ways that the government gets involved, and this can be concerning sometimes, but obviously governments want to look out for the welfare of their citizens. And some people feel like it's the role of the government to take care of its citizens. And some people say it's not the role of government. The smaller the government is, the better it is. The government that governs least governs best, as has been a famous quote to say. So the government sometimes subsidizes incomes to push a household over the poverty threshold, and that's welfare. Sometimes governments will even get involved in, like, say, socialism, that is to try to make society, or looking out for the greater good in society. Now, there is great debate as to how much the government should get involved. Our government gets involved quite a bit, but compared to some other places, not very much. So it kind of depends where you are on the political spectrum, as far as the left or the right, and how much you think that the government should get involved. There's also the public sector and the private sector of the economy. The public sector is that part that's controlled by the government. How much are interest rates? The Fed, how much money is printed. Um, those kind of things are controlled by government entities. How much money is actually printed, and how much are short-term interest loans, how much is credit on that. But there's also the private sector of the economy where people produce their own goods and get it, make new innovations and factor in the economy. Um, over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about GDP. And GDP is the sum total, like the price tag for every good and service produced in a country in one year. But the question we asked in class is, does GDP really tell the right story or the whole story? And what we understand is GDP is the size of an economy. The United States has the biggest GDP, biggest economy. China has the second biggest GDP, second biggest economy. And Japan falls at number 3. However, if you take the population of China divided by their GDP, per person, it's pretty small. So, what this might tell a better story, this is called per capita income, per capita nominal GDP. In other words, if you take the size of the economy divided by the number of people living there, what country really has the nicest style of living, right? The best ranking, if you will. For instance, on this chart, the United States, the average income, or the average, if you took the population of the United States divided by the amount of money we make, you're sitting at number 7 on this chart, and the World Bank ranks us number 8, and the United Nations ranks us number 9. What does that mean? That means if you go to small countries like Liechtenstein, which is in Europe, or Monaco, which is kind of tucked in like the southern part of France, or Luxembourg in between Germany and France, or places like Switzerland, which is a pretty significantly big sized country, or Norway, or Iceland, or even Ireland, or even like the country of Qatar in the Persian Gulf next to Saudi Arabia. Uh, the people there might have a higher standard of living. And that's kind of one of those things that we're talking about, the standard of living. Where are you at? Just because you live in the world's biggest economy, maybe you're still living under the poverty line. Okay. So this kind of gives you a little indicator of where, life is good. If you moved to Sweden, it would be nice, maybe even nicer than the United States. You know what I mean? Depending on which chart you're looking at, or at least relatively close, depending on what part of the country you're living in. So let's look at some of the characteristics of a free market system. free market system is maybe that ideal that we're striving for, where people have the ability to start their own business. What's the ease? How easy is it to start a business? Because the harder it is to start a business, then the more impact it's going to be on the economics. So the more government involvement, the harder it is to start an economic venture. So little government involvement in the economy. That's what we call laissez-faire, or hands off, or let it be, free system of market. Individuals own resources and answer the three economic questions of what should we produce, and how should we produce it, and for whom should we produce. Those are the three questions that in a free market society individuals are answering. And the opportunity to make profit gives people incentive to produce quality items efficiently. So why does somebody go start a business selling snowboards? Because they think that that's going to bring them profit. And how good of quality are these snowboards going to be? Well, if they make a high quality product, they believe that over time people will respect their brand name and they'll be able to sell more snowboards. So, why does anybody start any kind of business in Apple Valley or in LA or in Chicago or Miami? What's the market look like there? But under a free market system, the government's not telling them what to do. In fact, the more hands off the government is, the more the government just lets it be, the more people have incentive to make money. And we get a wide variety of goods available to consumers, theoretically at a good quality, because competition and self-interest work together to regulate the economy, to keep prices down and quality up. So the more competition there is, the better for consumers. And that self-interest, if a company's making crappy products, that company won't be in business very long, right? It will get a bad reputation. And we know that these things are true if you just watch stock market trends, right? Productivity creates wealth. Countries with free markets, property rights, and the rule of law have historically seen greater economic growth because they are more productive. We used to use the term third world countries. I crossed it out because the modern lingo is developing countries. And we call ourselves a developed country because we have this open market free system, and we have all kinds of goods and services and cool products because of competition and because the government is more hands off than it is in other systems. Okay. There is an economic index of economic freedom, where they go around the world and try to rate how easy is it for people to make money, how easy is it for them to set up businesses, and how fair is the system. In every society, whether people favor the right or the left, the question is always, how are resources allocated? And there's some people who think that capitalism is the greatest thing in the world because in capitalism, everybody gets a fair shot at making their money. And if you get into a communist system where the government controls everything from the top down, there's less motivation. The government's controlling everything. However, if you have capitalism that is not controlled at all, then you can get just a few people having all of the wealth. And if they control the media, then they can control what we think about what's going on, which can cause violence, which can cause class struggle. And it's interesting to see different approaches to that. In a free market, an example of how a free market regulates itself. If consumers want smartphones and only one company is making them, what's the quality going to be like? Is there going to be innovation? Are they going to be coming out with new models if there's only one company making cell phones? Other businesses have incentive to start making smartphones to earn a profit, and especially if they have different ideas. So the more cell phone makers we have in the market, this competition should drive the price down and the quality up, which means lower prices, better quality, and more product variety. We produce the goods and services that society wants because resources follow profits. The end result is most efficient production of the good that consumers want, produced at the lowest prices and the highest quality. And that's why we live in this free market economy. And even places like China that are communist, I'm using air quotes here, still favor a lot of ideas in capitalism because they know that people are motivated by incentives, right? People respond to incentives in predictable ways. So free markets push innovation because people want to make money, and if it's new or it's better, right? The price should stay low because there's competition. If it's easy to start a business, and here's something that sounds weird, if it's easy to fail, and if it's not so damaging, if there's no punishment for failure, then people are willing to take risks. So if I go out and start a company and I go bankrupt, I'll just start again. If you have a forgiving system that allows for that, then people are willing to take risks. If you look at some of the richest people in the world and try to figure out the number of times they went bankrupt, you might be like, whoa, well, who cares then? If I go bankrupt 5 times and I score 1 time, as long as the last time I do it, I score, then who cares, right? And that open competition allows for better products and better supply. Here's an economic idea. As we continue to talk in this class, we want to understand the idea of scarcity. Remember, scarcity is unlimited wants, limited resources. So here's the scenario. A group of 40 college students get on a bus to go to a dance 30 miles away. Shortly after leaving, the bus finds that it's too heavy to go over a large hill. 10 students need to get off the bus. You and your partner need to find 5 different ways to decide who should get off the bus. How would you make this choice? In reality, these are economic choices we're making all the time. Who gets the nice cars? Who gets the nice piece of property? Who gets to buy a house right on the beach? These are choices we are making in our society all the time. You might think this is not fair. Everybody should get to stay on the bus. It's 30 miles. That's ridiculous. And how should we decide which 10? Are there Are any of the situations fair? How are resources allocated in communism? In communism, the bus driver says, everybody's equal and randomly just selects 10. How are resources allocated in capitalism? The smartest, the best looking, the ones with the right family name, are they the ones who get to stay on the bus? What role do prices play in capitalism? Well, everybody who's willing to pony up $20 gets to stay on the bus. But I don't have $20. Well, then you're walking. So I think it's really interesting as we look at some of these scenarios in an economy class, we realize that, again, economics is almost a psychology class in a way, where we're kind of looking at what makes us or what determines the choices that we make. Sometimes we look at money as actually having value. Why would you give me substance to keep my body alive, food, in exchange for a piece of paper with the face of a dead president on it? And that same piece of paper with the same ink on it, but a different number. I mean, a $1 bill and a $50 bill take the same amount of money to produce, don't they? They're made of the same paper and the same ink. Why would you give me more product for one with a 1 and 2 zeros rather than one with just a 1? I mean, what is the real value of money? And how come a euro has more value than a dollar? And how come China has purposely deflated their currency, the yuan? And how come if I have $1 and 1 British pound, they're worth a different value in society? So why does the value of money change? These are these economic questions that kind of get us thinking about the psychology. What economy? How big is the economy that's backing the dollar? versus how big is the economy that's backing the yen, right? Obviously, the dollar is the currency of the biggest economy in the world, so its value is strong. You know, there's a group of 28-ish countries that work together and have a single currency, and they use that currency across different national boundaries to make trade easier, so that it's easier for somebody to say this value is the same as that value. Every time you trade across currencies, there's money lost, right? Every time you change things, you lose things in translation, they say. That invisible hand, the concept that society's goals will be met as individuals seek their own self interests. If everybody seeks their own self interest, those things will balance each other out. I want to get a good deal, and you want to make money. So if we can find that nice medium spot, trade is going to happen, right? Here's an example. Society wants fuel efficient cars, so profit seeking producers will make more that are better for the environment. Competition between firms results in lower prices and high quality and greater efficiency. The government doesn't need to get involved since the needs of society are automatically met. Competition and self interest act as an invisible hand that regulates the free market. So, should the government get involved? Should the government step in and bail out a giant bank because it's, here's some air quotes, too big to fail? Sometimes, here's what the stock market was looking like in the 07s, 2007, and in 2008 we hit this big huge recession, because there was people who were overreaching and the stock values were getting too out of control, and people were trusting that the stock market was always going to be going up, and people want an easy way to make money. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is, right? So sometimes the government will put in stimulus acts where they'll try to help the economy keep going up. But where does the government get its money from? Right? I mean, what's the real value of that paper currency? So this is really interesting as the government steps in and bails out certain industries. Is it really helping out? At the end of this week here, our learning goal number 8 is students will understand that prices send signals and provide incentives to buyers and sellers. When supply or demand changes, market prices adjust, affecting those incentives. Thanks for being with me. At the end of my notes, I always try to put a collection of good videos on economics that try to help us understand some of the principles that we are learning about. There's different videos that produce different economic ideas, and I encourage you to check those out. If we are in class, I would show some of them. Because we're doing this distance learning, I'll only assign certain ones in Google Classroom, but great place to go and to learn and to help you to understand these principles. Thank you for being with me on week 26 as we studied the fundamental economic concepts.